Investigators in Moscow, Idaho are looking for people in a specific vehicle that could hold clues in the murders of 4 University of Idaho students. It's actually the first specific request for information about a person who may have been in the area when the murders were committed. Law&Crime's Anjanette Levy has the latest on the plea for help from Moscow, Idaho.
Investigators here at the Moscow Police Department aren't saying much about why they're asking for information about this vehicle, other than they say the person or people who were inside that night may have information critical to this homicide investigation. This is a Hyundai Elantra between the years of 2011 to 2013 that's similar to the vehicle police say was in the immediate area of the King Road home when Kaylee Gonsalves, Maddie Mogan, Ethan Chapin, and Xana Kernodle were senselessly murdered in their sleep.
I knew Ethan really briefly in a class that we had. I think it was last fall. Seemed like a really good dude. So pretty sad to hear the news. And it's also the one person that I knew in Sigma Chi.
Max Kime lives across the street from the home and said he didn't know the young women who lived there, but he said it's loud most nights, especially with college students partying on weekends. The request for information about the Hyundai Elantra came the same day Moscow's police chief and other officers removed Maddie, Kaylee, and Xana's personal items from the home so their families can retrieve them. Boxes full of clothes, shoes, and other items loaded into the back of a truck to be returned to the families. Almost 1 month into the investigation, police say they still have no suspects.
We still continue to work on the premise that we believe this was a targeted incident. We're unsure. We're still making the determination whether that was the actual residence or the individual or individuals inside.
An event is planned for Thursday evening in Moscow to remember the 4 young students, Kaylee Gonsalves, Maddie Mogan, Ethan Chapin, and Xana Kernodle. People will be able to write notes of remembrance and post them in town. In Moscow, Idaho, I'm Anjanette Levy for Law and Crime Daily.
And Anjanette and I actually took a deeper dive into what Idaho State Police Communications Director Aaron Snell, who you just saw, had to say. We did this on Law and Crime's podcast, Sidebar.
Who do you believe was targeted? And he said they still don't know. Now, that's what he's saying. He said they don't know if it was one person targeted in the house, more than one, or if it was the house itself. And I said in response, like, well, what do you mean? Burglary gone wrong? And he's like, and he said, but they're getting these test results in from the crime lab. They're going through video and all of these different things. I'm sure they're going through the victims' cell phones and social media accounts. And there are people all over this town who've been interviewed by Moscow police and the FBI and Idaho State Police. So I thought it was interesting that they still don't know or still won't say whether they think it was the people targeted or the house. And there were other things I asked him about too. You know, when are we going to get to see this hear this 911 call? I mean, usually you hear a 911 call pretty early on. And he said, you know, he didn't think it would be released immediately, but he thought it might come sooner rather than later.
And you can hear more from Anjanette on our podcast Sidebar. I actually spoke with her about what she's learned on the ground in Idaho, and we're going to continue, of course, to follow all updates on this story, not only on the Sidebar podcast, but also here on Law and Crime Daily. We're following a major development in 2 big cases that have impacts in the United States and beyond. 2 women looking to be released from jail. One wins her freedom while the other has to go back to her cell. Brittney Griner, the U.S. Olympian and WNBA star, was officially released from a Russian jail as part of a prisoner swap. And Courtney Clenney, the OnlyFans model accused of throwing a knife at her boyfriend and killing him, was denied bond. So let's dive into a little bit more on Brittney Griner's release first. So the basketball star was in Russian custody for 9 months after she says she accidentally put vape canisters with cannabis oil in her luggage. She was traveling back to Russia where she plays basketball in the off-season, and she said she had no criminal intent. The U.S. State Department declared that she was unlawfully detained in May, but she was sentenced to 9 years in prison. Officials agreed to release Griner in exchange for the U.S. releasing Victor Bout, a convicted Russian arms dealer known as the Merchant of Death. The exchange of prisoners happened in Abu Dhabi, but left behind was Paul Whelan, a Marine convicted by Russian officials of spying in 2020. He was sentenced to 16 years behind bars. Griner's wife, Cheryl, who calls Brittney BG, spoke alongside President Joe Biden at the White House on Thursday. She said she'll continue to fight for other prisoners like Paul Whelan to be freed.
Today, my family is whole, but as you all are aware, there's so many other families who are not whole. And so BG's not here to say this, but I will gladly speak on her behalf and say that BG and I will remain committed to the work of getting every American home, including Paul, whose family is in our hearts today. As we celebrate BG being home, we do understand that there are still people out here who are enduring what I endured the last 9 months of missing tremendously their loved ones. So thank you everybody for your support. And today it's just a happy day for me and my family. So I'm gonna smile right now. Thank you.
Now, negotiations and bargaining had been going on for months as Griner sat in prison, but does the trade make sense? A basketball player in exchange for a weapons dealer? International law attorney David Teferi weighs in.
It was going to hurt for both sides. Say, Putin didn't want to give up Brittney Griner because he knew he had something of value and he wanted to keep that in his back pocket. And the U.S., we're trying to follow the rule of law. And Victor Bout had been convicted of very serious crimes and sentenced fairly to 25 years. And so it's tough for us to release someone like that. And and we worry about the message that sends to the world, to global criminals, that they can get out of jail in the U.S. If their home country uses an American as leverage.
All right, let's talk about it. Joining me right now is Law&Crime Daily co-host and public defender Brian Buckmeyer. Brian, this is actually a lot more controversial than people think. While some wanted her release from those dreadful conditions, there were others who believed she broke the law and that she deserved the punishment. Where do you stand on it?
Yeah, Jesse, the controversy doesn't end just there. Should she be punished for her crimes? Because don't forget, in many states of this country, what she did is illegal. Now, the headlines Thursday morning were filled with Brittney Griner, is coming home. Almost immediately, BG is coming home began to trend on Twitter. Now, Griner was arrested for having cannabis oil cartridges on her in Moscow at an airport back in February. But in July, the Biden administration recommended a prisoner exchange for Victor Bout, the merchant of death, as he is also known as, an arms dealer who sold weapons to rogue governments and warlords. Bout was supposed to do 25 years in federal prison for conspiracy to support the killing of Americans through a Colombian terrorist organization. Now, initially, negotiations said Paul Whelan, a Canadian-born American Marine, would be part of that deal. But in December, it seems like that fell apart and that wouldn't happen. That's going to be a huge criticism. On one part, great, we have an American citizen back home, but many people are asking, why do we exchange a WNBA player for an arms dealer? And what about the Marine that was left behind for almost 4 years now, come December 28th?
Yeah, it's a difficult situation, and I think we'll all be following to see if there's any developments with Paul Whelan. Now moving over to Courtney Clenney, that hearing that also happened on Thursday. Well, the judge in her murder trial was considering whether to allow Clenney out on bond after hearing arguments from the prosecution and defense at an Arthur hearing last month. And on Thursday, the judge denied the request for bail. During the Arthur hearing, which is basically a mini trial, the prosecution and the defense agreed that the one-time OnlyFans model and her boyfriend, Christian Obumseli, had a volatile, abusive relationship. During an argument in April, Clenney allegedly threw a knife at Obumseli, hitting an artery, and he bled out in their Miami condo. But Clenney's legal team says she was only protecting herself. In her ruling, Judge Laura Cruz wrote that when the crime a person is charged with is punishable with life in prison and their guilt is evident, they can't be released before trial. The order also states that the court does not find the defendant's claims of self-defense credible. Despite requests from Clenney's lawyers for her to change her mind, the judge didn't waver.
Your Honor stated that you didn't feel comfortable having her released on house arrest to her parents in Texas. There is an inpatient treatment program in Boca. She's monitored by the Miami-Dade Community Corrections Department on home confinement and would, I think, hopefully alleviate some of the court's concerns.
Judge, I don't believe it requires response. There are no conditions that will ensure her presence and the safety of the community, and we disagree with any release to any inpatient treatment.
All right, now I want to bring in co-host and former trial attorney Terry Austin to talk about this. So Terry, Courtney Clenney might be well known on social media, but the judge basically treated her just like any other defendant, right?
You know what, Jesse? That's exactly right. Courtney Clenney may have millions of online fans, but Judge Laura Cruz is definitely not one of them. During the Arthur hearing, Judge Cruz listened to Clenney's defense team reiterate why she should be released on bond pending trial. In Florida, capital offenses like murder are classified as what they call no bond offenses. If a defendant is charged with one of those crimes, they will only be released before trial if they can demonstrate that they are not a danger to society and that they are not a flight risk. Clenney sat quietly on the side of the courtroom near another female prisoner who seemed familiar with the system. In contrast, Clenney seemed visibly distraught and was ultimately consoled by her attorneys. Her defense team told the judge that Clenney could remain in her parents' home with a monitoring device or even move to a special facility where she could be monitored more closely. But the judge was not buying it, and she said, look, you are staying in prison. You're a flight risk. You're not getting out.
Yep, that's very two different situations right there. Moving over to disgraced Hollywood mogul Harvey Weinstein, while he awaits his fate in Los Angeles as deliberations continue in his sex assault trial. 8 women testified against Weinstein in this trial, where he faces 7 sexual assault charges and a possible life sentence. Weinstein did not take the stand in his own defense, but his team argued that the accusers were either untruthful or that they had consensual sexual relationships with him. This is Weinstein's second sexual assault trial after being convicted on similar charges 2 years ago in New York. He's serving a 23-year prison sentence in that case, and an appeal was recently granted. Now in Los Angeles, the jury panel has been at it for 4+ days with no questions posed on their behalf.